Good morning. Is the mic working? Good morning, everyone. We'll call our meeting to order. First item we have is a request for bill introductions. Any bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on to a hearing on Senate Bill 154, increasing reimbursement rates for providers of home and community-based services under the intellectually or developmental disabled waiver, making appropriations for such rates and providing for legislative review of the waiting list for such services. First, we'll have an overview with Scott Abbott. Scott, are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. Senate Bill 154, as the chairman described, would provide an increase to provider reimbursement rates for home and community-based services provided under the intellectual or developmental disability waiver. The bill would appropriate approximately $12.4 million to the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services for fiscal year 2022 from the State General Fund, and would direct the agency to implement a 7% reimbursement rate increase for those providers. The bill would also appropriate approximately $11.4 million for fiscal year 2023 for an additional 6% rate increase, and would appropriate approximately $10 million for fiscal year 2024 for an additional 5% reimbursement rate increase. The bill would also provide for an ongoing annual increase to those reimbursement rates, beginning in fiscal year 2025 and each fiscal year thereafter. Those rates would increase by the greater of 2% or the annual percentage increase in the CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers for the immediately preceding calendar year. The bill would also direct the Robert G. Bob Bethel Joint Committee on Home and Community-Based Services and CanCare Oversight to review and make findings and recommendations regarding the number of individuals who are on the waiting list to receive home and community-based services under the IDD waiver during the committee's meetings in the second half of 2021 and the first half of 2022. The Joint Committee would submit their findings in their annual report to the Legislature at the beginning of the 2022 and 2023 regular sessions of the Legislature. The bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, so July 1 of this year. And Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Scott. Questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions, Scott. Do you know if in statute we have any other area or agency or program that has that annual increase, the 2% on the consumer price index?
Senator, so I am not aware of instances related to human services that has that kind of an increase built in. That phrase that refers to an increase based on the CPI increase over the past year does appear in statute in a few instances, but I'm not remembering the contexts right offhand. I can look into that more for you. But as far as human services, KDADs, other related agencies, I'm not aware of that approach being used.
Thank you. And I would appreciate it, no big rush, but where that may appear and how it may affect any other agency or situation or statute. And then my other legal question is, I assume if we pass this and put this in there, technically we can't obligate future legislatures. Is that true? And if it is true, how far out can we go obligating future legislators?
Well, Senator, anything in the bill would, of course, be subject to appropriations. So the bill does make SGF appropriations for those first three fiscal years, but even those would be subject to future legislative action that could reduce those appropriations. And of course, the ongoing increase would be subject to appropriations in those future years. So you're exactly correct. There's nothing in this bill and really no mechanism to bind a future legislature not to change those provisions.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of following up to what Senator Hawk was talking about, I would question why we have a 2% floor on that kind of thing. We're in kind of some very unusual times. And I just wondered what their thought process was on the 2% floor.
Senator, I can't really speak to the thought process of the requester. Perhaps any one of the conferees who will follow me to testify on the bill would be able to give you some insight on that. But as far as the thought process of why the requester behind the bill chose 2%, I couldn't speak to that.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Scott. We will move on to our proponents. First, we'll have Matt Fletcher with Interhab. Welcome, committee, Matt.
And members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the merits of Senate Bill 154. And a lot of what you'll hear today will not be new or revelatory information. In fact, this is a lot of the same information that has been shared with various committees over the last several years regarding the chronic underfunding of the IDD service system, really in the last 2 decades. And how chronic underfunding has impacted the IDD system is really the crisis at hand. It has made it so that IDD service providers in communities across the state have a great deal of difficulty in recruiting and retaining a direct care workforce. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about who that workforce is comprised of, the types of workers who do this vital work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in our hometowns. But first, with the chronic underfunding, really beginning in the early 2000s, we had an incredible long stretch in which the IDD provider reimbursement rate was not adjusted in any significant manner. As a result, the IDD service system began to fall behind even inflationary increases in each of those years. I've included a chart on page 1 of my testimony that shows really the various rate increases that have been provided to the IDD network versus just the CPI during those same years, the increases during that time. There have been stretches where the legislature took the initiative to include rate increases for this provider network, and we do appreciate those increases, including the Senate's strong work last legislative session in including a 5% provider rate increase for these providers. Unfortunately, that rate increase was swept as part of the mid-year allotments due to the pandemic crisis that the state was facing at that time. So just when these providers were about to be thrown a lifeline, that was removed from them. What I do want to talk to you about is capacity. And when I talk about provider capacity, I'm really talking about workforce. And we surveyed our members. This survey was done just about a month before the pandemic started last year. Our members reported an annual average turnover rate of 46%, and that's higher than the national average for IDD service providers of 44%. Some of our members reported turnover as high as 77%. We also noted in the data that 59% of our providers have had to limit or cancel worker benefits due to the stagnant reimbursement rates. And they've also had to limit the admission of additional persons into service due to the lack of reimbursement. And about 53% of our members indicated they had to limit the number of new individuals coming into service. That's incredibly important when we talk about one of the pieces of Senate Bill 154, which is to finally examine and prepare a strategic plan for the IDD waiting list. Now, as I mentioned, these numbers came before the pandemic, and the pandemic has only served to exacerbate the problems that providers have faced due to underfunding. I've included some national data for you on the pandemic, including that 68% of providers had to close day or employment services during the pandemic. And here in the state of Kansas, a number of our providers are only now returning to regular services or something that resembles a regular service schedule. Because of difficulties in some parts of the state in getting persons with IDD vaccinated, providers have had to continue to keep these services shuttered or to severely limit the numbers of individuals who are in these service settings at any one time. Those closures impacted 32% of provider revenue, so about a third of provider revenue took a hit last year due to the pandemic, and 100% of providers that responded to this national survey had increased overtime costs of up to $77,000 monthly. You'll hear from a couple of providers as conferees this morning, and I'm sure that they can speak to you about the increased overtime costs due to the pandemic and just in general, the overtime burden that these providers shoulder due to their inability to recruit and retain this direct care workforce. So who are direct support professionals? I pulled some national data on this for you. 87% of DSPs, direct care workers, are female. 25% are responsible for a dependent under the age of 18. 17% live in a household below the federal poverty line. 39% don't live in affordable housing. 16% lack health insurance. And 50+% of this workforce receives some form of public assistance. I've included at the bottom of page 3 the living wage calculator for the state of Kansas. And I think this is important. When I refer to these individuals struggling, these providers struggling to recruit and retain a quality direct care workforce, it's important to note that in our survey of our members, they reported that the average starting wage for direct care workers was about $10.49 an hour or $22,000 annually. The average wage for DSPs was about $25,000 annually. And if you stack that up against the living wages indicated on page 3, you can see how much a person in this type of position would struggle just to make ends meet, especially if they were responsible for a child or 2 children in the home. Now, why now? Why do we need to address these issues now? Well, I really do believe that we are staring down a cliff in terms of the availability of a direct care workforce. These providers are competing not only with fast food and big box retailers in their communities, but also with other human service entities for these type of workers. And we are on the precipice of the baby boomers retiring, which will remove a large portion of the workforce. It will also be a double hit for human services because the baby boomers will begin to need direct care services as consumers. So if we cannot find a way to help these providers get on a strong, sure footing in terms of recruiting and retaining now, they are really going to struggle in the coming years. And in fact, I've included some statistics to that regard. 48% is the expected demand increase for DSPs in this decade alone. And another interesting note, and my Associate Director, Nick Wood, will follow up on this in more detail, but 100% of our members have reported experiencing increased complexity of support needs for the persons they support. It's important to note that this system was designed at a time when our population, their needs in many ways were less complex than they are now. 65% of providers indicated that their organization has experienced higher levels of turnover just due to these individuals who have higher needs, complex needs. So what's in 154? You've heard the rundown of what's included. There are 3 years of rate increases, a 7% in the next fiscal year, 5%, or 6% and 5% in the following 2 fiscal years. We want to say thank you to the work of the Ways and Means Committee. You have included some items in your budget for this fiscal year and next fiscal year, which we believe are in the spirit of what Senate Bill 154 is trying to accomplish, and so thank you for that work. The second piece that has been referenced already is a study of the IDD waiting list, and the bill calls for the Bethel Committee to do that study. However, there is currently proviso language on the House side that would establish an interim committee this fall and winter, a joint House-Senate committee that could study these issues. We wholeheartedly support that proviso language, and again, we feel that's in the spirit of the progress that is embodied in this bill. The third piece, and I was glad to hear some questions regarding the cost of living kick that's included in the bill. Our thought is that if during the last 20 years, if our providers had just been adjusted every year for inflation, they would be in a much stronger position today in terms of their ability to recruit and retain a workforce. Their sole source of revenue are the reimbursement rates that are provided through the state of Kansas via the HCBS IDD waiver. And so they're unable to really, they're very dependent upon these funding streams. So if we just adjusted them for inflationary increases in those years, we feel they'd be in a much stronger position today. That's what that language in Senate Bill 154 represents, is a way to try and tackle for the future how to give providers this inflationary adjustment each and every year. And so if the language is perhaps inartful, or if there's a better way to approach how to accomplish that, the provider community is of course open and willing to work on other approaches. But that's the thought behind it, is how to just keep their nose above water, so to speak, each and every year. With that, I think I'll stop and answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you, Matt. Questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And very nice presentation, Matt. Thank you. InterHab supports Medicaid expansion. Is this correct?
We do, from the standpoint that it would benefit our workforce. It won't have an impact on persons served. They're already eligible for Medicaid. But for our workforce, if you recall, I mentioned 50+% receive some public assistance, and a fair number of them are at or below the federal poverty line. It would represent an opportunity for them to perhaps purchase health insurance for them and their families.
I have to say that I know a little bit, not a lot, but when you say it wouldn't benefit your clients, isn't with the new federal legislation, the American Rescue Act, isn't there a particular piece for states that pass Medicaid expansion?
Thank you for jogging my memory. Yes, that's correct, Senator. There is an increase in the FMAP for HCBS services. Thank you for the jogging my memory. And that would be most welcome for the IDD community, yes.
Right, it's a substantial increase for 2 years. So that just is another reason when we're talking about this special population and how we have been behind and how we want to increase, there's just another reason for us to pass Medicaid expansion.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the COVID pandemic and the impact that had. I know some of your providers were eligible for PPP grants and others were not, and I don't quite understand why there was a difference in those who could get those. And I want to be clear about a second part of that question. I'll ask it, and then I'll have to remember what I asked you. But if they got some of those PPP grants and the things that the CARES Act provided, could they have used that to increase the rate for your service people, or is that locked in because of the way we do the IDD waiver?
Yeah,
and I'm not clear about that. So.
Great questions. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct. Some of our providers were able to get in the very first round on PPP loans. Others had to wait until the second or the third round to fit into the eligibility as it changed over time, and some have not. It's funny you asked that question because the provider in your district And the testimony is written testimony submitted to this committee, but that provider took the PPP loan that they received and they turned it into hero pay or hazard pay for their workforce, and were able to increase the wage. Now, they don't know if they'll be able to do that permanently because the source of funding is limited. They only have a singular pot of money there to do it, but they increased that pay, and what's pointed out in the written testimony is that their turnover rate dropped when they did that.
Other questions? Senator Petty. So you had another one?
No, that was not a setup question, but I appreciate knowing that. Thank you.
Senator Petty. Okay. Everyone good? Well, thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much. Oh,
Next, oh, sorry, Senator Petty.
So, Matt, you did testify about, within the bill, that there's this recommendation for this interim committee, but, and other than Bob Bethel. So, I mean, I'm just saying this from a legislative perspective, but, I mean, Bob Bethel looks at, I've been sitting on Bob Bethel now for a year, looks at this every meeting. So is the thought that an interim would just focus on only that? Because it's going to be the same people. I mean, unless, like, I just think it'll end up being the same people.
I have never sat in your position, and so I cannot speak to which carries more weight. The thought was, the initial thought behind the crafting of this bill was that the Bethel Committee, which already has meetings scheduled on the calendar, would be perhaps the easiest way to accommodate this. Subsequent to that, discussion focused on how to give this study of the waiting list and creating a strategic roadmap the biggest kind of oomph we could give it. And that's how the interim committee concept came to be. But we, again, the provider community, we think it'd be great to make progress, whether it was the Bethel committee or an interim committee. We, yield to your expertise.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll have Nick Wood from Interhab. Welcome, committee, Nick.
Thank you, Chair Billinger, members of the committee. My name is Nick Wood. I'm the Associate Director at Interhab. And as Matt touched on a little bit, in my role at Interhab, I work with an internal task force that we have that just focuses on complex needs of people with intellectual and developmental disability. So this is everything kind of but their long-term supports and services needs. You know, in our system, we really only have one service as far as Medicaid is concerned. That's personal care, attendant care, personal care services. And with that service, we provide basically everything a person would need to live in the community. And that's a wide range. You'll hear from some other conferees today who will kind of describe the needs of the people that they love. And you'll get a sense of kind of how varied the needs can be. So an intellectual disability is, a person who has been assessed as having an IQ below 70. And a developmental disability typically could include people who do not have an intellectual disability, but have other developmental conditions like autism or cerebral palsy or seizure disorders and that sort of thing. So a lot of people could be served on the DD waiver with a variety of needs, which is why we look so closely and problem solve so often about complex needs. And just to describe them, we kind of break it down to 3 areas: the medical healthcare needs, the behavioral healthcare needs, and age-related conditions. A lot of people with intellectual disability are just living longer these days, which is a good thing. But as they get into more kind of the retirement or twilight of their lives, their needs change and their preferences for how they're served change. And states are adapting their service models to meet those needs. So one thing overall just about complex needs is that it has a lot to do with this staff turnover. You know, if you have high turnover, it could be a result of people just not feeling confident or competent that they're able to work successfully with the people that they're with. They might have someone who goes into a behavioral health crisis on a fairly frequent basis, don't feel like they're able to meet those needs, or just don't feel like they're getting paid enough. When you have high turnover, you know, you're basically constantly training people, and there's a lot of then other support, maybe from outside of that service provider in the community, but through line supervisors and that sort of thing, where they're constantly filling in, constantly getting to know people, and getting to know their issues. So essentially, you know, medical healthcare needs, while everyone on the IDD waiver has Medicaid, and they have a medical card and they go see a doctor, they might have a lot of other complex care needs that need to be met on a more regular basis. So, you know, refastening G-tubes, dealing with respirators, dealing with wheelchairs, just a variety. You just couldn't believe the variety of needs that they have to meet. And so our members are really constantly training personal care attendants to do this work. Behavioral health, we actually have a bill that would promote a statewide crisis services program for Kansans with IDD. And the idea is that since these personal care attendants are already essentially the primary behavioral health support providers to the people that they serve, but a statewide crisis program would help to make sure that there's a team approach to preventing a crisis. And it's not unrelated to just the amount of people every year who are entering the waiver via crisis. You know, with a waiver, you're saying these are people who have been assessed to be at risk of an institutional level of care. So that's everybody who's currently on the waiver and the waiting list. We have been moving so slowly that people who are on the waiting list are entering a crisis of one variety of another, and then they're given access that way. So that's not the way anyone would really want to provide services. You want to be more preventative, and that's what we're constantly working and problem solving to do. So a lot of these things are just drastically improved by just better capacity in the system, making folks more confident and competent, giving them a little bit better pay so that they stay on the jobs longer. They don't need as much training. There's a lot more better rapport between them and the people that they serve. And so that's something that would be drastically helped by this bill that's before you today. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Nick? Senator Fagg.
So we serve about 9,100, and right now the waiting list is around 4,100. It could, so it always varies, and it depends on how many people you serve total. In Kansas, it's just under 50,000. You'll hear from someone today who has a fairly high needs, whose loved one has fairly high needs, has around 30,000, but that could be impacted by different things. So they may not need 24/7 care. They may have some other services that combine, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier, that everyone has their own kind of individual needs. But.
Other questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm always asking questions about things I should know, but because of you guys, often I know if I can remember the answers the next time you come. But,
sure.
I'm concerned about autism, and I know that population has increased either our ability to diagnose it or the condition itself. What % of children who grow in, not children, but who now are adults that are diagnosed as autistic are being served by your providers, would you guess? And how many of them are on, Senator Fagg mentioned the waiting list, the 4,100. How many would you guess? Do we have a kind of a ballpark notion of where we are with those adults that are autistic?
So I have to confess, I'm always doing this at Interhab. I'm always sort of trying to estimate and help us get information to problem solve better. One reason why we keep referring to a study in interim committee would be to really drill down on all of this. So national, we tend to go by national figures. It would be nice to have a more exact number in Kansas, but it comes down to assessments. So everyone who is able to get Medicaid gets when they're a child, they get what's called a Can Be Healthy, so otherwise called an EPSDT screen. But very often for things like intellectual disability or most disabilities really, they're referred by their primary care doctor to another specialist. And it's at that point that it's not, Kansas isn't unusual. Most states have a little bit difficulty making data match. So we do rely on estimates, and then we know how many people are being served. But the one kind of international estimate is that it's 1 to 3% of the population. There's another national study that says that it's, I think, 2.23 for all intellectual and developmental disabilities. So, you know, I guess if I were put on the spot, I would estimate it in Kansas that there are about 30,000 folks who are Medicaid eligible. Not to say that they have Medicaid, but of those folks, just the people who have intellectual disability, about 85% of them have just a mild form. Another 10% have moderate form, and then only 5% have severe or profound. So that's again, speaking to the wide variety of needs. It's highly possible that someone with just a mild form of intellectual disability, who still always technically would be at risk of institutionalization, would have a lot of really high needs and high cost needs, because they've got one of these other complex needs that I mentioned.
I guess the concern I have, and I know a few instances of people in my family and also in the district, is that, and I'm just looking at that subset of disability of autism, but as their parents age and these children who might have been able to be maintained in the home and even through early adulthood will not be. So I'm sort of guessing that this is just even this subset is potentially a growing problem that your bill at least begins to address. But
yeah,
it just seems like we're not really on top of how large even this subset of that problem might grow to be.
Right, and it's an issue that benefits from being proactive, especially with people with autism. Yeah.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Nick.
Thank you all.
Next, we'll have Tom Keel with ResCare South Central on WebEx. Welcome, committee, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity this morning, and then also appreciate your service to all Kansans. So I know that takes a lot of time and commitment on your behalf. So we did submit written testimony. I won't read that to you, but just highlight a few items in our testimony. First, ResCare Community Living in Kansas does support Senate Bill 154. ResCare is part of a family of brands of Bright Spring Health Services, and it's a national leading provider of home and community-based services, really with the primary focus of serving high needs and medically complex populations. And Kansas, ResCare is throughout the state. The specific area that I oversee is Central Kansas, and have offices in Manhattan, Salina, Newton, Wichita, Derby, and Winfield. So we do have two other parts of the areas of the state, the east and the west, and I think we're in most communities across the state. We primarily provide residential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, We have day service locations throughout the state. We employ about 600 employees statewide. Right now, we have about 150 vacancies across the state. Staffing is our most critical issue that we face. And, as you can imagine, COVID, this last year has just been a tremendous challenge for all providers. And, when I drill that down, it's really our direct support workers. And, those are our heroes. Those are our champions. Those are the folks that commit, 24 hours of their day, serving folks that need support to help them live their best life. And, I think that's, I mentioned earlier in a different hearing that, when I go home at night, I really, what keeps me up is to make sure that the homes that we have staff that are quality staff, trained, that they know the individuals that live in the homes. They know what their medical needs are, their emotional needs, and can just work with them and again, just help them live their best life. And, I think in comparison, many of you may be business owners and, you can relate to the fact that turnover would have on your business and how that would hinder, in certain areas of your business. So really, we strive at making sure that we have good quality folks in our homes. It's becoming, even before COVID, it was a challenge because we compete, and you'll hear from a couple other presenters, but we compete with nursing homes and other industries for the same type of labor and people that want to open their homes or open their hearts to provide care to folks that are in need of assistance. So. So with that, I mean, that's really what it's about for me. At the end of the day, it's about our direct support workers and making sure that we reduce the turnover as much as we can. I did have last month we spent $48,000 over our budget for overtime, and so we try to staff our homes and reduce overtime. And I had a conversation with a staff person one time recently, and I said, we got to cut your overtime. And he said, Tom, he said, if you cut my overtime, I can't work here because I can't afford the health insurance for my family. And so, and so we kind of balance that as well. So, but with that, I'll stand for questions, but would appreciate your support on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll have Jerry Michaud from DSN WK on WebEx. Welcome to committee, Jerry.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to share our support for Senate Bill 154. I work for Developmental Services of Northwest Kansas, an organization that's been serving Northwest Kansas for better part over 50 years, 53 years, I think, if I did it correct. But we are committed to serving and supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We've been challenged, particularly in this last year, but our coming before the legislature each year is because we advocate for the needs of the system. In many businesses, when things ratchet up in terms of cost, no one likes to, but businesses elevate the price of whatever it is that they're making, a good, a service. And that's how they manage in their business. In our world, those dollars that are appropriated through this process, the legislative process, are what establish the rates that we have to operate in. And Matt and others have spoken to the kind of the history that we've been up against. But I would be remiss if I did not say thank you for the actions that have happened over the last several years. We all wished that last year's 5% adjustment to the rates could have happened. It didn't. But our staff, that they are the lifeblood. You can't have a service for people without people. I think the word hero has been thrown out before. It is absolutely true. Stepping through the responsibilities of any given day in supporting individuals. So thank you for that. I know you have my written testimony before you. This bill is really a stepped approach to try to make a difference moving forward, to kind of help catch up from an extended period of time when we were unable to do that as a state. And so it's a stepped approach. You've heard the mention of the workforce challenge. That is our challenge, primary challenge as well. We have, at the end of January, 36 open positions. That's a very tough place to be. When we talk about turnover, I think Matt mentioned the average is 44% for Kansas. We are right on that mark. Some locations are higher when you start talking about complex needs. And then when you consider labor force, most of our region, the 18 counties in Northwest Kansas, are mostly rural. I was looking at the unemployment rates for our region, and they range from 1.7% to 3.5%. I think the state's average, if I heard correct, was 3.5%. Our average for the 18 counties is 2.25%. You add that up to how many people are available for the work in the workforce, it's a small number. So you put all those compounding factors together, and you have a real challenge, which is why we're asking for the support through the legislative process. We rely on that. We see this as a kind of a practical approach to help us to step forward in addressing the needs that are absolutely before us. And then the last piece of this is the discussion that we've been having on the waiting list. It's a big issue for the state, and we have to come up with a plan that helps to address the needs. I was just looking at a situation just yesterday, a crisis. And the crisis path is the path into the system right now, because I believe the time of wait is about 9 years, if I'm remembering correct. So having a plan to break that waiting list down to need in Northwest Kansas, I know we have over 100 people that are waiting for services. I won't carry on, but we urge support of this, and we are grateful for the support that's been already put forth this session to make a dent in that, and I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Jerry. Just one, and then we'll open it up, but your starting wage is $9 an hour?
That is correct. And what we have done when we have the challenge of trying to recruit people, we've had to incentivize and offer a credit for people who would come to work for us that might have a similar work history. And so we've offered a 2% credit per each year up to 5 years. Well, you do the math on that, and the comparable adjustment might be $9.90 an hour, still well below what we hope for, wish we could do. And that in effect, it created yet another problem for our current employees. When you ratchet up an incentive to bring new people in and you don't do anything for the existing employees, you create another challenge, a parity issue. And we've been working to try to adjust that as well.
Other questions, Senator Hawk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerry, I have Western Kansas roots. Thank you for being here. The Interhab testimony said the average starting wage was $10.49 per hour. So I'm curious, why is that $10.49 average, but you start at $9?
Well, when you look at the number of years of the workers that stay in in the positions that they're in. I believe our average tenure is about 2.24%, but if you take those who have been working with us, and I know we have some workers that have been working direct service for 20 and 30 years. So you're going to see that have an effect on that average.
So they said the average wage was $11.91, which is about $1.50 more than the starting. Is your average wage get up to about that?
It's higher than that $9 an hour start, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to ask real quickly on your workforce, and you take Northwest Kansas, there's only so many people in your workforce, so you're kind of, they're either working somewhere or they're not. My question is, the people that you have working, do they have to drive very far, you know, to go to work for you, or are you recruiting from outside the area? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the question. Depending on where we have locations throughout Northwest Kansas, and I'll just pick one as an example, Atwood up in the corner of the state is one of those. We may have some workers that come in from Nebraska that might do that. We have workers that may come up from Colby to work in that setting. And so, yeah, we have to cast the net, if you will, you know, wide. But this is a real challenge in recruiting, and we have to have an ability to make a wage that's going to draw people. That's part of our challenge. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jerry. Next, we'll have Rachel Green, COF Training Services on WebEx. Rachel, welcome committee.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Rachel Green. I'm the Director of Operations at COF Training Services, a community service provider supporting individuals in rural counties in East Central Kansas. Every day, the health and safety of individuals with disabilities is compromised across our nation due to this workforce crisis that we've been talking about. Just to put this crisis, the magnitude of this crisis in perspective, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that across the nation, average turnover across all industries is 3.5%. And as Matt and multiple individuals have stated, the average turnover in our field is 44%. In Kansas, the turnover is usually higher at anywhere from 50 to 75%. So this high turnover leaves providers critically understaffed and costs a significant amount of money in training investment as well as overtime. As an example, in fiscal year 20, COF lost $253,000 just in training and background check costs for the staff that we lost in that year. Additionally, we spent over $600,000 on overtime costs filling those open positions. That's almost 15% of our total annual revenue just on turnover costs. So why is there such a significant crisis on our hands? There are many contributing factors, but in my experience in the past 7 years, there's 3 factors that are the primary contribution. The first and most significant one is the poverty level wages that this field provides. The primary demographic at COF for DSP workforce are single mothers who operate on one income household. The average pay across our nation for a DSP is $12.09, which is below the federal poverty line for a family of 4. In Kansas, our average is $1 an hour less than that at $11.14. At COF, our average pay rate is $11.32 with an average hourly benefit cost of $6.76 per hour. So our total average cost hourly is $18.08. While it's great to be able to provide such a strong benefit package, benefits don't put bread on the table, and that's what many of our DSP have to come to face every single day. Knowing the importance of increasing those DSP wages, we have a committee that's been dedicated to raising the wages as high as they are right now, and we still can't even compete with entry-level positions. In discussions of trying to increase wages further, we've had to come to face the same hard truth that increasing staff wages any further without significant increase in our organizational income will result in our organization becoming insolvent and thus not being able to support the 300+ individuals with disabilities in our services. When you run a local Indeed job search in our county, the first job that pops up is Walmart, starting wage at $20 per an hour with no GED or prerequisites required. This job posting is followed by a litany of other postings such as McDonald's, Arby's, and other fast food industries, mostly starting at about $13 an hour, which is more than we can currently offer. Additionally, as spoken to previously, the Kansas unemployment rate is 3.5%. Having most of the Kansas workforce working is fantastic, but it leaves less people to fill our vacant positions. With such low unemployment rates, people aren't competing for jobs anymore. Jobs are competing for people. Based on pay rate alone, we can't compete. Then when you consider all of the additional challenges that this field poses, it's next to impossible to recruit and retain quality staff. You're going to hear from one of our quality staff that we have been able to retain today, and we're so lucky to have been able to retain her, but that's taken significant personal sacrifice on her part to be able to continue working for us, and that's sacrifices she shouldn't have to make. So speaking to some of those challenges in the field, the second contributing factor to our high turnover rate is the complex role of a direct support professional. A DSP is the epitome of jack of all trades position. These individuals are expected to master an array of complex interpersonal skills such as crisis management, communication, including nonverbal communication, emotional intelligence, problem solving. At the same time, they're required to perform tasks expected of many different roles, including but not limited to that of a teacher, a therapist, a chauffeur, dietitian, chef, maid, financial advisor, the list goes on. These individuals are also required at any minute to intervene in life or death situations, such as intervening in a crisis behavior, working directly with COVID positive individuals, or performing CPR, all while making less than a livable wage. The third significant challenge that plagues our field is complex needs of individuals that we serve. Nick provided some detail on those complex needs, but I just want to touch on this briefly so that you know the financial implications of providers of these needs. So on average, COF uses 45% of our total resources for just 5% of our clientele. That leaves the remaining 65% of resources to serve 95% of our clients. As one example, COF supported a young man with complex needs from 2017 to 2019. This young man was 6'3", 350 plus pounds, and experienced significant behavioral and mental health challenges, mostly related to his diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. He required, at minimum, one-on-one staff 24/7 and engaged in harmful and disruptive behaviors daily that often required up to 5 DSP and multiple director level staff to ensure his health and safety and the health and safety of those around him. That individual's annual funding covered about $33,500, but COF's cost to serve him in 1 year was about $608,500. So the cost for us to serve one person was $575,000 more than his annual waiving funding covered. Additionally, while we served that individual, 8 of our employees quit and directly referenced the challenge and the safety risk of supporting him as the reason that they were quitting and or leaving the field entirely. So this is a big challenge. How do we address it? It's complicated, and as previously stated, a nationwide crisis. It took years for it to get this bad, and it's going to take time and investment in order to address it. But we can start addressing this crisis by investing in the field with a regular rate increase program proposed in this bill. A regular rate increase that at minimum accounts for inflation will allow providers to gradually increase our staff wages to hopefully at least be able to compete with fast food industries. We've been asked before, how do we know this money is going to go to staff wages? And you've asked some questions today about why our staff wages are so low. I can tell you that rate increases will go directly to DSP wages, and they will, but actions speak louder than words. Here's what we've done in the past 20 years to invest those rate increases into the staff that we've received. Although there have been few and small rate increases, COF has invested over 100% of the ones we have received directly into our DSP wages. We've done so by raising the starting wage from $762 in 2000 to $1050 in 2021. We've implemented a career ladder by establishing a lead DSP role called an advocate at every one of our locations. This allowed us to increase 27% of our DSP's wage to $13 per hour. We've also increased our benefits package from $2 an hour to up to $8 an hour. And lastly, we've established multiple bonus programs to incentivize our staff and give them an opportunity to earn more wages. One of them is an attendance incentive where staff have the opportunity to earn an additional 62 cents per hour just for showing up for their shifts or finding coverage when they can't. We've also established a performance appraisal system where they have the opportunity to earn anywhere from 2 to 6% of their annual salary based on a performance assessment done by them and their supervisor. And lastly, we have a referral bonus to help with that recruitment where our staff have the opportunity to earn $250 per employee that they refer to us and is employed for up to at least 6 months. We know at COF that our direct care workforce is the foundation of our company, and we are dedicated to investing into our foundation. Any further rate increases that we receive will continue to be invested into them. You might be wondering what 7% will get us. Are we just putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound that really requires a larger bandage? That was a reference that one of the legislators in another hearing mentioned, and that might be the case. For our agency, 7% rate increase will give us an additional $455,000 in potential funding. That equates to about a 75-cent pay increase to all of our employees. While that's not going to bring us where we want to be, it's not our end goal, it's a step in the right direction. And that's what we're asking you to do today, is to help us take that step in the right direction, because we can't do it without you. Thank you for your consideration. I will now stand for questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Rachel, for your testimony. Earlier, we got information from Matt with some stats about the average care staff position. And one of the things that was mentioned in that list was 50% receive some form of public assistance. And so I was wondering, with your staff, does that hold true? And if so, and then what types of assistance do most of them have to rely on?
Absolutely, that definitely holds true. So much so that our company has looked at investing in a position that is almost like a social support worker for our direct care staff, because often we're needing to meet with what they're making. So in order to retain staff, I, as a director of operations, am talking to DSP about how can I help you get access to food because you can't afford to feed your children tonight? How can I help you get access to affordable health care, and what are our local resources? So I spend my time doing that because that's helped me keep our staff. But many of them are having to go to free or reduced clinics for healthcare. They're having to go to our local food bank pantries that we have a list of available to give to our staff when they come to us crying, telling us that they can't afford to feed their children. Many of them are having to rely on each other for childcare because childcare is wildly unaffordable. During the COVID pandemic, we had a coalition of staff that were all working and volunteering to support each other and watching each other's children because there was lack of childcare opportunities. A lot of them are receiving food stamps. Some of them are eligible for Medicaid, or their children are eligible for Medicaid. So there's a wide range of supports that our staff are having to rely on just to be able to live.
And just to follow up, would you say that it falls into the 50% range?
Absolutely, probably a little higher.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Rachel. Next, we'll have Kristen Cook, COF Training Services on WebEx. Kristen, welcome committee.
Thank you, Chair and distinguished members of the committee, for the opportunity to provide testimony in your consideration of the SB 154. My name is Kristen Cook, and I have worked as a direct support professional for a total of 6 years. As a DSP, I've provided to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to empower them to live as independent and as possible in our communities. As a DSP, I support many people who don't have families, and in the years I have been at COF, I have developed such strong and trusting relationship with individuals that they truly trust and miss or need and miss. Being able to work with the same individuals for years has allowed me to get to know them. I know that what upsets them, what makes them happy, when they are struggling, I know how to help make it better, even when they can't tell me what they need. I have also worked one-on-one with 4 different individuals with complex needs. Some of these individuals display daily challenging behaviors such as physical aggressions, verbal aggression, elopement, theft, sexual inappropriateness, inability to communicate verbally, etc. My ability to form a report and get to know these individuals was what helped me help them be successful. I have considered going into a different field and have even had opportunities presented, but I love what I do. I want to be able to continue to make a difference. It has taken financial and personal sacrifices in order to be able to continue to work as a DSP. Financial struggles as a DSP. I am and have been the sole financial provider for my family. I use overtime to supplement my wages in order to make ends meet. I have worked an average of 60 hours a week for multiple years in a row, not being able to afford child extracurricular activities. Not even birthday parties. Not being able to afford new clothing for myself or my family. Not able to afford normal life circumstances. Had a car breakdown and was unable to repair it. Went for 4 months without means of transportation for myself to work, store, etc. In addition to medically fragile family member who had many appointments. Affording a single vehicle was a significant challenge. Being able to afford 2 functioning vehicles was out of the question. My partner and I always dreamed of being able to afford a place in the country to have a space to host, get together, and potential investment in a small business. On the DSP income, we had not been able to make that dream happen. Missed holidays, birthdays, family functions, school activities, times with loved ones that it is precious and fleeting. Christmas of 2020, I worked 6:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and missed the opportunity to celebrate and spend the time with my stepdaughter and my partner. If I would have known that was my last Christmas with the 2 of them, I would have been home. I lost my partner 2 weeks later to COVID. And I have not only lost him, but I lost time with my stepdaughter, who now resides primarily in Texas with her mother. This loss was incredibly hard, but my coworkers, individuals I support, have helped me support me through all this. I have learned so much as a DSP. This job has made me stronger in so many ways. I want to be able to continue to grow in the field. Thank you for considering investing in this field along the side of me by passing the SB 154. I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Kristen, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your experiences with you and your family. You are a hero. You're a hero. Thank you for what you do. It's not some ball player. It's people like you. You're a wonderful person. You have a big heart, and you're in a position to make a lot of difference. And you do every day in the lives of these folks. And I can't say enough to thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add to what you're saying. I had the opportunity to be around some IDD people, and a couple times a month would be around. And I sit here with a tear in my eye listening to that, because everything you said is exactly true. And you are appreciated, and I want to tell you thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for being here today. It's very impactful, guarantee you. We all take it to heart. Everyone on this committee is working hard to try to make sure that we can help the situation. Next, we have Diane Voss, NW Kansas parent, WebEx. Diane, welcome to committee.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name's Diane Voss. My son's name's Sean Voss. He is 27 years old. He struggles with autism and he is classified as nonverbal. He now lives in a group home over at Hayes. He relies on trained staff to understand his limited communication that he has. Direct support staff is needed on a daily basis to help him perform regular tasks such as bathing, dressing, going out in the public. He just needs supported help. 3 years ago, Sean had the opportunity to have a life away from his parents. We moved him to Hayes, where he lives with 5 other male individuals who have different disabilities. Ever since he moved over there, there's been a continual change of staff, and dealing with these types of individuals, you really need to have staff that understands everything. And when you're continually changing them, that's when problems and struggles appear. Due to his limited communication, Sean really struggles to make his wants and needs known. And if you're a new staffer, you're going to have a lot of problems. This last year has been more of a struggle due to the necessary limits that COVID placed on these group homes. The limitations were placed there for the individual safety, but COVID placed a huge burden on both the individuals and the staff. Individuals were restricted to their homes. Outings were drastically reduced. Staff members were exposed to COVID and illnesses out in the public, and then they'd come and take care of the individuals in their homes. This caused a big risk to both of them for attracting and becoming sick with COVID and other things. When an individual got sick, the staff members were there to take care of him. It was a very concerning situation for both of them. As a parent, we all know that we're not always going to be there to take care of our son. Our hope is for Sean to have a happy and safe home surrounded by quality staff that are very knowledgeable in his needs. We want him to be part of the community, to lead a wonderful life. I believe that he deserves that, along with all the other individuals that live in group homes. I had an opportunity to talk to some of the staff before they were leaving. You know, they would tell me, "Oh, Diane, this is my last day." I'd say, "Hey, what's going on? What's happening?" They'd tell me the pay wasn't enough. They couldn't even pay their bills. There were a few of them that had 2 jobs and they still couldn't make ends meet. There was one that had 3 jobs and a family to try to take care of. They said, "We love our jobs, but we can't afford to stay." As a parent, I want quality staff caring for my loved one. This COVID-19 was pretty risky for both staff and the individuals. Many of the staff members took care of them because they cared. I feel it's our duty to meet the needs of people who cannot take care of themselves. More funding is needed to keep trained staff in place and to keep them in their homes, trying to help these individuals achieve a happy life. The bill that is presented to you is a practical, common sense approach to a solution. This bill helps meet the needs of the people that are in the group homes, as well as those on the waiting list for services. I believe there's approximately over 4,000 people that are waiting. That's pretty powerful right there. I appreciate your kind attention. I hope you consider to support this bill. It's greatly needed. Thank you so much.
Diane, and thank you for being here today and sharing your story. Questions for Diane? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll have Brenda Klotz, El Dorado parent on WebEx. Brenda, welcome committee.
Thank you for taking time to hear my testimony today. I'd like to stop for just a second and say a quick hi to Tom Hawk. I don't know, Tom, you and I sat on a vision technology meeting together. So it's nice to see you again. Here is Ryan, and hope you can see him. He's our son. And I'm going to be kind of piggybacking on things that some of the previous speakers have already mentioned. Ryan's 46 years old. He has multiple needs. When he was born, he was a normal kid. When he was 5 years old, he just got sick and he went into a coma for 2 weeks. No one seems to know why that happened, but it did. When he woke up, he was found to have a mental retardation and uncontrolled seizures. He is perceptually impaired, which means he doesn't recognize things by sight. That kind of comes in handy when we're wrapping his Christmas gifts because he can't see them. He has expressive aphasia, meaning that he can't think of the words to communicate what he's thinking. So over the past 40 years, they've also discovered that he's bipolar now, and he has aggressive behavior if he starts feeling threatened. He can walk, but because of his seizures, which occur daily and they're uncontrolled and they come any moment with no warning, they can be really dangerous. And so he's had a broken nose, he's had broken ribs, broken teeth, and at the moment he has a broken arm that he's recovering from. Ryan can't do most of the things that you and I can do. He can't cook, he can't drive, he can't get a job, he'll never get married or have kids, he can't take his own medicines, and there are 4 of them that he takes. He can't get dressed by himself or even take a shower on his own. He requires 24-hour supervision. And we've lived in Kansas for a long time now. In fact, he's been a recipient of the services here for over 20 years. And over the course of the years, the amount of money the caretakers received in relationship to everybody else's pay has not kept up. And as a result, I've seen that the quality and the number of applicants for the job of being a DSP or a caretaker has decreased over the years. And I can attest to the fact that caretakers have taken on the job, which they thought was going to be like babysitting. But once they discover the amount of work and all the responsibility they have for keeping people alive, they quit. They go right down the street. And as Rachel mentioned, they go to work for Walmart or McDonald's where the pay is better and they don't have all that stress and responsibility. Now, what impact does that have for Ryan? Well, since he doesn't recognize people by sight, it takes him a really long time to learn a new staff's voice, and even longer time to trust them. And I might add, it's not in my testimony, but one time staff, not here, but in another place, they took him to Topeka and dropped him off with people that Ryan had no idea who they were. He couldn't recognize them by sight. He had no idea where he even was in Topeka. Anyways, the new staff, so he doesn't trust staff for a while, is my point. He's really happy when there's consistency. And when you have new caretakers, new staff in the homes or in the workplace, and they have different ways of doing things, it's really hard for Ryan and the rest of the clients in the group home. And he gets very frustrated. And so his way of coping is to call me. And my record for one phone calls in a day is 37 phone calls from him. Now, not only does that continual turnover of staff impact Ryan, but it also impacts the other clients in the group home because those dynamics change when someone new comes in. Plus, the current caretakers. When you can't get qualified people to be trained and stay, and they quit, our existing caretakers have to step in and take over. You can't just leave Ryan alone. He has to have coverage. So caretakers get called in on their days off to work, or they have to work longer hours. And I've personally seen caretakers say, hey, this is it, man. I can't take it anymore. I'm burnt out. And they go to work someplace else. There are people in other states who've said, well, this is really potential for a lawsuit because it's negligence. So there's that consideration. The lack of well-paid staff has impacted my husband and I, obviously. 4 years ago, we moved from where we had lived for 20 years. We left our friends and our family because where we live now had a better situation for Ryan. But now, even here, good applicants have gotten progressively more difficult to find and keep. There's just not enough money in the job. My husband and I live with fear all the time. We never know when we're going to get the next phone call to tell us that Ryan has another broken bone, or like last year, Ryan's turning blue because he had a seizure while eating lunch and gotten food stuck in his throat. And had we not had trained staff right there, Ryan would be dead right by now. So we also are afraid that Ryan's going to get frustrated trying to communicate with new staff and get aggressive. Then, of course, the police will need to be called. And Ryan takes all those different seizure medications in an emergency one. So we're always afraid that new staff is not going to know which seizure medication to give him at the proper amount at the proper time. Because if they give him the wrong dosage, it's another life-threatening situation for Ryan. So in summary, I really think the state of Kansas can and do better. We were a leader in the nation one time at caring for IDD people. I truly believe we need to provide funding to attract and train and retain a better quality of caretakers. And as a former educator, I know that the K-12 takes a great deal of money, and I'm in favor of that. But surely we have time and money that we can spend for people like Ryan. I think we can be a model for other states and let them know that here in Kansas, we value and we take care of all people, even usually forgotten people with special needs. And I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, go ahead.
Brenda, appreciate your testimony today. Are there any questions for Brenda? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does Ryan live with Flint Hill Services?
Yes, he does. I'm really, really impressed by how they care for their clients.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Brenda, good to have you here. I certainly agree with the comments my chairman made on one of the previous presenters about being a hero. Those workers are heroes for our children and the adults that are in our care. I think you're also a hero as a parent, and Ryan is blessed to have you as an advocate for him and for the staff that are helping him. And you mentioned some key points that this just isn't a babysitting job. It takes people with training, but also people with a heart, but they have to survive in their lives too. So thank you for pointing that out in a very real way for your child. And I want to assure you, Ryan is important to us too, and I thank you for being here and for remembering our previous work on that vision technology meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, I will move on. Written only from Lori Feldkamp from Big Lakes Developmental Center Incorporated and Lori Birchfield, a parent. So I'll point that out. Are there any opponents to this bill? Anyone neutral to this bill? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close our meeting on this our hearing on this bill. And committee, if you don't mind staying a few minutes, I would like to go ahead and work this bill. I think it's so important. I don't want to even leave it lay overnight. I think I would like to work this bill. Is everybody okay with that? Senator Petty?
Well, before we do that, I would like just a quick review about what we have in the budget bill 270, what we have in, is it 276? What's in there? I know we just did this last night on the floor, but.
Right. We have funding in there, but
Right.
it's subject to getting approval across the Senate, subject to getting through conference committee, subject to getting back across the Senate, subject to making to the governor and her signing it, and then subject to not being vetoed or line item vetoed as far as the amount of money we put in there. We did put in there, and I could go grab it and get exactly for you, but I've seen so many numbers in the last 2 days that it runs together.
I think it's important for us to have that comparison about what we've done in our bill.
And I think this just
I
think this is just going to pick up after what's already in there. But if you excuse me for 1 minute, I'll run and I'll grab my bill. Oh, Senator McGinn, thank you.
So my only concern about working this today is I would like to do a little bit more get more information on that CPI.
Okay.
The 7 and the 2 are in the budget. That is all what passed. Well, we'll find out today.
Sure.
But the CPI is new and different.
And I agree. I forgot about the 2%, and I also forgot about, that we're not even sure if that's where it's been used in the past, and there were some questions on that. So, okay, well, we'll just wait to work this. We'll get the rest of that information for everyone.
I appreciate it.
Are we all okay with that? Okay. All right. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.